Clerk Konecki, please call the roll.
Trustee Alfano?
Here.
Trustee Cordova?
Here.
Trustee Corkery?
Here.
Trustee Kozar?
Here.
Trustee Kumar? Trustee Patrick?
Here.
President Kazone?
Here. Will you please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, tonight our committee of the whole meeting is alcohol policy discussions. Village staff sent out a detailed memo listing several proposed actions on liquor licenses. One of them is an elimination of 3 classes of license, E, X, and Y, of which no license is currently active. At the direction of the board, draft an ordinance to establish rules that prohibit BYOB, or bring your own bottle events, in commercial spaces, except under specific circumstances, to restaurants who hold a license and are responsible for corkage, uncorkage of the liquor, and/or to a responsible licensed individual with training and insurance to take responsibility for the site. No examples of this type of ordinance were found. The establishment of a caterer's license and the establishment of a salon license. And just as some background for the board, this issue was brought up several years ago, probably 7, 8 years ago, when we had a couple of restaurants that had BYOB, and the discussion and the decision of the board was to not go ahead and have any type of ordinance and just let people do what they do. The state, I believe, does not have a BYOB license, and looking at the city of Chicago, they do not have an ordinance. They just say, if you want BYOB, you just have to follow the state regulations, no underage drinking, no over-serving, things like that. So that's where we are on this. This DuPage managers and mayors did a survey, and they sent out some local ordinances of local villages that have BYOB and some that don't. So we can start the discussion to see if what the board's feelings are on this, as far as should we regulate them, should we not, what type of license should we have, and Trustee Corkery.
Has this been causing any problems lately, or is there anything that we could prevent? Or
it has not, with the exception of one establishment that wants to open up a banquet hall and have BYOB. So I think that's kind of like the main reason why this is being brought up now. There are a couple of hair salons that do things like, mimosas, get your hair done, get mimosas, and, things like that, which I think are, not a big issue. We haven't had any issues with that yet.
What sort of issues would we be concerned about with
without having a person in charge who has Bassett training, and without having someone in charge who could run the event, you have the chances of underage drinking, you have a chance of over-serving, the normal things that you would have at a bar or someplace where you're serving liquor, but without any responsibility. You don't have any, right now they would not have to have insurance, they would not have to have any kind of Bassett training. So that's kind of what we're looking at here.
Are we worried about legal liability falling back on the village for that, or just generally preventing underage?
Yeah, I don't.
Currently, the way the law exists is that in order to serve alcohol, you have to have a license to do so. So if they're doing something in violation of our licenses, or not getting a license when they otherwise would be required to do, the liability, there's a lot of immunities that would protect the municipality. So I think the reason why this conversation is taking place is to make a decision as to whether or not this is a permitted license. Otherwise, without it, a BYOB establishment would not be able to serve alcohol.
Serve as in have people bring their own?
Correct.
Out here? Okay.
Right.
Yeah, I think I don't think we have any restaurants right now that have, but I know when Monte Casino was on Ardmore Avenue, the former Monte Casino, they had BYOB. And I don't think we had any issues with that at all back then.
Do we know of any issues? Because you said Chicago doesn't have one.
Correct.
Do we know if that causes a lot of problems for them, or?
I haven't really looked into it too much, but I haven't seen anything that shows a major issue with that in the city.
I imagine there's quite a lot of BYOB going on.
There is, yeah. If you drive in the city, yeah, you'll see a lot of restaurants have that. One thing that the manager and I did discuss is that after we meet today and get kind of an idea of where the board's looking, is to convene the liquor commission and to discuss it with the commission, and then possibly come up with either like an ordinance or the basics of an ordinance, and then come back to the board for a vote on it. We can get an idea of where the board sits on this. Trustee Kozar.
You mentioned some salons that do mimosas and whatnot. Are you suggesting that the patrons of the salons are bringing in their own champagne and the salon is just providing orange juice and glassware?
No, I think the salons were providing the mimosas, from my understanding.
So would that be considered a BYOB? Or that would just be providing alcohol at no charge?
That may fall under a different license category, but that, a BYOB would be where the patrons are bringing in their own license. That may be something more of a special event license to allow for alcohol on occasion.
Yeah. Trustee Patrick.
I do know that traditional barber shops in town also have like a whiskey or something along the lines to take a shot there, and that's something that has been traditionally passed down for quite a while. So if that's just offered to the patrons, I think along the lines of Kozar's reasoning, does that become BYOB, or should there be some sort of other license allowing that? And again, we haven't heard any complaints about anything specifically from salons or barber shops. So I'd like to know more about that.
Trustee Alfano.
So I think part of why we are having this discussion does stem from something that came to my attention from residents and neighbors, where we have had an establishment that is renting out their business, and then people who are renting it out are bringing in alcohol. And I really do think that there does need to be some kind of BYOB license for that, just because I do think that does need to be regulated if we want to have and support those types of businesses in town. I think that is something that we really do need to consider.
Okay. Trustee Kumar.
I want to say along the lines of what Ms. Alfano said, I would like some consistency, and we'll only get consistency if we have some sort of regulation that's consistent. Because otherwise, you're going to be allowing it in some circumstances, not allowing it in other circumstances, and it's going to be piecewise. If we're going to allow it, that's fine. But if there's a consistent process, if you're a BYOB business, this is your process, this is the cost, and this is, what you need to do. So we at least have an accounting of where it's coming from.
Okay. Trustee Patrick.
My question is, what is the process if somebody is issued a liquor license and goes against whatever the license is? How does a resident or a business either report that? What does it look like from the village's standpoint, and how do we respond to something like that?
Typically, the police department would handle liquor issues, so it would be the same with the BYOB.
So basically, you're saying the residents would have to call the police department with a complaint of a liquor license not being utilized properly, and the police department would then respond and then issue either a citation, or if a law was broken, make an arrest.
Correct. It's the same thing as a tavern or a restaurant. If they're somebody calls and says, they're serving underage, the police department would respond to that.
At that point, then, how does the village respond to multiple offenses of a liquor license being abused?
Typically, what happens is the proprietor will be called in for a meeting with the liquor commission, with the police chief, with the manager, discuss it, try to come up with some kind of a corrective action plan to stop it from happening. And then if it continues, the village has the opportunity to rescind the license and pull the license out.
How many of those has the village had in the last couple of years?
I can only think of one place where we've brought the owner in, and they took care of the problem.
So there are two avenues for redress when there's a violation of the liquor code. The first, as we were talking about, the police can issue citations. So that would be an ordinance violation or whatever other law that was violated because of the action. That would go through your administrative adjudication proceedings, that ordinance violation. But in addition to violating the ordinances, you'd be violating the terms of a license. There would be that issue to consider. And that license violation issue would go before the liquor commissioner, where at that point, the liquor commissioner can issue fines or suspend or revoke the license depending on the circumstances of the situation.
Thank you.
Suzanne can give a much more detailed presentation about this, but basically staff was looking for direction on a couple of things to prepare ordinances, which would then be reviewed. But I'll go in reverse order. If we want to do a salon license for the traditional barber shops, the one I go to on Villa has a bottle of bourbon sitting right there, or sometimes I think there's more than one, and little plastic cups that you can pour yourself a shot, and nobody. I've seen maybe one person in the 4 or 5 times I've been there ever even use it, but it's there, and other barbershops have that, mimosas at other salons. So there's a specific state license for that, and if we wanted to do, if we think that is something that we want to have codified, so we don't get, those are legitimate, but if somebody finds a way to find a shortcut around the code and use that as the way, the shortcut around the code, that hasn't happened yet. That's a way to head that off. We don't have to, we could also do nothing. And then there's a caterer's license. So like if you have an entertainment facility or a meeting hall, you can hire a caterer, come in, bring food and serve alcohol, and they're going to have a Bassett license. They're going to have training, and when you get a license, you look for how to not serve underage, how to make sure you don't. And then the BYOB is a little more complex, and it could either be held by restaurants for people bringing it in to make sure that there's no abuse that way. I don't know if that's a great issue in Villa Park. The one we've had an actual problem with in 2 different locations, the 621 East St. Charles, and then we had a couple of incidents over near the corner of Park and Ardmore, where people are coming to a commercial location that's owned by one party, and they don't own that property. They're renting it for the evening and having a party, and so that's the one that we were most concerned about. And then the other one, the elimination of the other 3 classes, that was pretty straightforward.
So my next question for you then is, if the village creates a salon or a barbershop license along with the BYOB, would that license then allow that business to go and get a gaming license through the state?
No, I don't believe so, because you have to have an actual pouring. That's a good question.
You would regulate that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
You don't have to make, we have a quadruple E where you can get a liquor license for a restaurant, but it specifically says you cannot get the gaming.
Yeah, and we could probably put it in there too as part of the ordinance. You're allowed to BYOB, but no gaming is allowed.
Right.
Thank you.
It could be written that way.
Yeah, so
Trustee Cordova.
I'd be more in favor of not doing, the salon or, a couple of the BYOBs. The places that have, the little bourbon bottles and things like that, I've been to a few of them, even taking like a 6-pack with 2 friends to go get tacos, right? It's the commercial space that probably bothers me, because you can just go and throw an absolute raging party with, just carts of booze, and it's not the same. These are 2 different things, right?
Right.
So is there a way that we can, look at capacity limits of, I don't know what the capacity limit of a barbershop or salon or some of the larger ones in town are. I don't know if that's 50 or 100, but the commercial space is probably 250, 300, some of them. I don't know what that one on St. Charles is. But if that is an easy way to say, if you can have more than 50 people in your place and you want to serve any kind of liquor of any sort, you have to get this type of license. If you're under that, then, and you're, a little restaurant that hasn't gotten their liquor license yet, or whatever it would be, then I feel like that would be a pretty good starting point, at least.
Would you allow, or would you make it so that way a barber would have to go get a Bassett certification?
Well, that's kind of what we're discussing here.
Yeah, I would say probably not, but then the other piece there is,
If you want to, we will, but that's what we're getting at. If you don't want to go that route,
Well, I think we're asking for your guidance and direction,
Yeah.
what other municipalities are doing, or what other institutions do as far as salons and things like that. Are they required to have a Bassett license to pour a shot?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's required if you have a state license that those who are serving are Bassett trained. So that's also a state regulation.
Yeah. Did you want to say it? Okay. Just Corky.
So when we say establishment of a caterer's license or a salon license, are we talking like a caterer's liquor license or a salon? So if you want to you can have a barbershop without the license, but if you want to have the bourbon bottle, you get the salon liquor license.
Correct.
if you want to pursue
If you
that.
want to, right.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah, and again, that's how, kind of what we're discussing here, whether we want to do that or not. Trustee Kumar.
Okay, is there a state salon liquor license that they have to buy?
There is one that would fall under the state license. So the only one that's not regulated by the state is the BYO, so carry in, bring your own, is not regulated on a state level, so it's up to municipalities. Kind of going back to your initial concern, I mean, the 2 options I think the board can consider is, so you can kind of give the opportunity for these event spaces to be BYO, right? Or we don't currently have a banquet or special event type, but it would be a liquor license, right? It would require them to store and follow state regulations if you had a banquet type liquor license. So I think that's kind of the options available.
Right. A banquet BYOB, not a banquet license.
That would be like a full liquor
Right,
license.
correct, yeah. Trustee O'Connell.
So with that said, I would say that I would not support a BYOB. I would say that I would support the banquet. And just because of something that Trustee Cordova had said where you could, so let's say that 621 only has a limit of 50 people. I don't know what the capacity limit is, but if we have another building that has a larger capacity, we could have like ragers, and with BYOB, it could become a big problem. And I would want to stop that before it started.
Trustee Kumar.
So what I'm getting is that we're thinking about a banquet type license for these events, and then for our barber shops or whatever, do they have to have a state license, or could there be a small license at the municipal level for them to pour their one shot of liquor or whatever?
If there's a state license for that classification, then they would need a state license.
And what is the cost of that?
I'll have to get back to you on
Yeah,
that. I
because
mean,
you're preventing someone from doing a small thing because it costs more than they probably may be willing to pay.
Yeah.
So those are 2 different issues there.
Yeah, and I think, we kind of looked broadly at what some municipalities do, what we know may be happening in our community, and we may want to consider. The board can choose to not go that route at this time. I think the bigger concern was sort of these special event facilities, but we kind of took it as an opportunity to look a little broader. But, the board could say, we're not interested in looking at salons at this time. So it's kind of, I think that was the feedback that we were looking for, so we could kind of go back, draft some language, and get additional feedback from the board. Because with liquor license, you can regulate everything, right, or nothing. So I think kind of throwing some things out there, knowing, some requests that we've had, and just trying to get that feedback.
Trustee Corcoran.
I'd just say that if the rest of the board wants to pursue this further, especially in the area of the larger gatherings, I'd be open to talking about it. But right now, especially with the smaller venues, just it seems like if they're not causing any problems, I'd rather leave it alone at this time. Not try to stir up trouble where there isn't any. That's where I'm standing right now.
I just wanted to add a couple more things about the BYOB. So I think when you look at other comparable communities, a lot of them do not allow BYOB for event spaces, right? Most of them are restaurants. You have sort of like the paint and sip, so like more craft-oriented businesses, stuff like that, that are much more regulated. And the point of the BYOB is really to provide some parameters for how people are serving. So a lot of communities limit like how much an individual can personally drink. So I can't walk in with 5 bottles of wine and have a party. I can only, it's like 1 bottle of wine per couple, or, something along those lines. So the point of having an ordinance in that is to provide that opportunity to businesses that might not be able to meet the restrictions of a full, liquor license, but also providing some parameters, allowing for additional insurance, having the training and those sort of things. So that's really kind of, I think, why some municipalities have offered that. And then I think there is confusion, when we look at some of the challenges we've had with some more recent businesses, is our municipal code is silent on it. So a lot of people don't realize, and the state is silent on it. So they just think, well, it's fine because nobody says you can't do it. So we know it's happening. So that, is kind of the other reason why you may want to consider it, to provide those parameters. Like you can't be an event business and be BYOB, restaurants, other, smaller type businesses might be more applicable.
Trustee Kozar.
If we're regulating events, we need to define what an event is.
Yeah, right. Would it be just like a one-time, I'm going to go rent this space today? Or is it?
Yeah, because I think the one place that we're talking about that we're kind of brought this whole thing up would be a one-day event, a wedding or a birthday party or something like that, where they would just supply the space and then their customers would bring.
But even if they do catering, they can roll in their own kegs and
right,
and whatever, right? And that's a birthday party on a Saturday night at that place right there.
Right.
I know exactly which one it is. Yeah, those. So an event is a one-time, short, one rental type of thing.
Correct.
That's regulating the
Yeah.
actual, person that is actually having the event holder. Do you want to regulate the establishment that opens up its, doors for these types of events?
Right.
That's what the village will need direction on as well.
Yeah, so because you can go and rent 8 Saturdays in a row and just throw like a DJ night and just, I am the promoter of this club, this movable club. It's like I don't think that. I think we regulate the establishment, not the renter. The renter, it could be, if it's me and 3 people, we just rotate through. The establishment, I don't know how we track that, but that would probably be part of this conversation as well.
Trustee Kumar.
I think if the renter rents, they should be liable for getting the catering, making sure that the catering license is up to date or whatever from the person they rent to, because that's the only way you would be able to
Well, if it's BYOB, then, sorry, go ahead.
then you don't need it, right? It's BYOB, you don't need it. But the question is, aren't we trying to kind of prevent that aspect within the rentable spaces?
Correct.
So if we're going to write an ordinance, we're probably not, what I'm hearing at least, is that we're not going to allow BYOB in a rentable space, but only catered events within a rentable space.
Correct, and that's kind of what we're talking about. Like the managers, like Manager Harline said, we're really looking at three things: salon license, a caterer license, or a BYOB, just anywhere. So that's kind of. And I don't know if a catering license would be applicable to this space, or we would just want to make it a BYOB ordinance to cover that. Trustee Alfano.
So with the BYOB license or discussion, can you help me understand how it would apply to parks, like the rented gazebos, for example? Would that also fall into those park categories? Because we do have people who go to parks and then they are also having like this BYOB event as well.
Well, you see here, when you're talking BYOB, we're talking the sale. Typically there's food or something being sold, and then the BYOB is part of that, or like in an event of a party at a banquet hall. You're paying for the hall and the food, and then people are just bringing in their own.
Okay, because what we're finding is when one establishment is closed, then we're just moving to the park. Yeah.
But if you're in a park in Villa Park, I don't think you can have liquor.
Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't think so, but I just wanted to clarify that.
I mean, we would require a special event liquor license.
Yes.
If they were actually having an event.
In the park.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I believe when they sign the forms to like rent, that it says that, but
Okay.
I will confirm with
Okay.
parks.
Just wanted to double check.
And they can't have the events after dark unless there's.
Okay.
So,
Trustee Kumar.
so the BYOB events that we're talking about are possibly BYOB at like a craft store or something, or at an event. I mean, these are multiple kind of things you're talking about, which we're trying to club into a single ordinance, and I feel like, the salon licenses are a totally separate issue from this particular situation.
So I guess the first question is, does the board want to allow special event facilities? So typically those are defined within our code, and I would defer to Director McLaughlin about that, as sort of assembly uses, right? So they have that within their code, and then they're sort of special event facilities. So does the board want to allow them to be a BYOB type facility, or do you want to provide for regulations in terms of a banquet hall, so like a full liquor license with parameters, or require that they, bring in catered people who are licensed by the state, and so we would have the catering, so I guess that's number one, is which direction does the board prefer, and then we can kind of go from there.
I would like to state my personal choice. It depends on the number of people who are going to be there. I mean, if there is, under 15 people there, I think BYOB is fine. If you get to 50, 20, 100, 250, it's a totally different.
So that's what's challenging. Some of them, they might rent and have small events, right? But I think if you regulate it, then it applies to that whole facility, right? Go ahead.
So to address the capacity issue, I think you're referring to like an individual event, 15 people, 20 people. But we actually have to regulate when they apply for that CO.
Mark, just state your name.
Oh,
sorry.
Mark McLaughlin, Director of Community Development, sorry. And the majority of those are actually rated at a capacity of 49. So you have to assume 49 people will be there.
Okay, so, but if you know the capacity of the places, let's say under 50, then possibly a BYOB is okay, in my opinion. Now, if it goes up to 200, I wouldn't suggest that, I would suggest an event catering license
Right,
type
so-
of situation.
So in the zoning ordinance, the use is allowed, so it just depends on how big of a facility that use wants to move into. So you can have an assembly, rent your own banquet space in a 49 or 150 capacity. We're going to look at it the same way from a zoning perspective, and then the liquor license should follow the same way. So you have to consider both 49 or 150, which is why a banquet license would make more sense than a BYOB in that particular situation.
Okay.
Trustee Kozar.
Stepping back to what you had just said earlier about the party can't then go over to the park. You said that there's no drinking in the park, right? So how does the village get away with it with music in the park?
Unless you have a special event permit, which they have,
So you get a special event permit,
with somebody who has a
It
Bassett
allows-
train, yeah.
but I don't mean selling, but I'm saying BYOB. I mean, you can bring coolers full of liquor and sit there and watch the band
You
in a
are,
public park.
you
That's
are
okay.
not supposed to, but we did,
Well-
Yeah.
I mean, it happens, right? Everybody's okay with it. You drink there. President Kazone, you drink there.
I buy from
You know.
the VFW.
Right, but I mean, you're
Yeah,
still in a
point out.
public park.
Right,
So
right.
I'm just saying, I mean, if we allow it, let's allow it for everybody. Like it can't be only some people some of the time. If you
But
guys
again-
are drinking in the park, let other people drink in the park.
But again,
If you don't want to let people drink in the park, then don't drink in the park.
we have, so whether or not somebody has brought a beer or a cooler occasionally with their family into the park, what the village's stance is that a Bassett trained person who's selling alcohol is the only one who's supposed to have alcohol there, to eliminate, basically say you can have alcohol in the park at any time. That's a big step from what we're doing now, where, we've got police and barricades on the area around the event, where the village is running the events where we sell alcohol, or when other people, when the Chamber of Commerce does, that sort of thing. So that's, and just allowing alcohol in the parks is separate from the issue of permitting, but what we're looking for is the groups of people who have gone into a couple of buildings and, noises that had alcohol, noises, et cetera, that disturbed their neighbors. Now, the noise is a separate ordinance and can be enforced on its own, but the amount of alcohol consumed sometimes leads to more noise. And there's no regulation of who's drinking in those sites, right? As opposed to an event in the public in the park where you have a lot of eyes. So.
And in addition, those events are falling under a specific liquor license, the Class G liquor license, where there's regulation of who's serving that alcohol, ensuring that only individuals that are 21 years old or older are getting that alcohol. That license also requires that there's proper liability insurance for that event. So those events are governed by regulations that, protect from abuse and protect from harm.
And who's responsible for enforcing those?
That's the village and the police department. So if it's an event that's occurring without a liquor license, there would be enforceable action that could be taken.
Have there been any events such as that in the last couple of years that have had any sort of citations issued or anything of that nature?
Not that I'm aware.
Are we actively
Chief
enforcing
McCann?
it, is what I'm saying?
Not large events.
Deputy Chief McCann. Police Chief.
Not large events, no. We get calls for teenagers drinking in the parks or sometimes adults, but usually they're not permanent events, so.
So as long as we have a permit for the event, we're okay. Then I'm just confused, then what are we, if you get a permit for the event, then the liquor license is built right into it, is basically what you're saying. So that's where we're at already.
No.
But you have to get a liquor, yeah, it's a,
Class G liquor license for a special event by the day. So you're getting the liquor license for that event.
From the state and from the village.
you have to have both, the state and the,
So during Music with the Park, that's what you guys are getting, a Class G.
Well,
And it's the village
the
that's getting
VFW,
it?
it's the VFW is getting it.
But they're selling it.
They're selling it,
Right.
correct. Right.
But the BYOB part of it is through the village.
There's no BYOB component to
Legal
it.
BY, just like the people drinking in the salons and that sort of thing. It's not, even though there's a state code for salons, that's, it has not yet come to be a problem, so we haven't enforced that. I mean, I'm not sure if the salons, that because there's a state ordinance that or state code or state liquor license for salons, if that means that salons in Villa Park that don't have that state license are in violation. I mean, I do know that, as far as I know, that none of them have ever created a problem, so that hasn't, I mean, that specific item hasn't come up, but there's a, we're kind of straying from the central topic.
Suzanne, the salon license, is that just for selling of liquor? Or is it,
So I believe it's, it can be a few different ways, but most of the time it's providing it for free
Okay.
in conjunction with services. And so typically on the municipal level, it regulates like how many one person can have while they're receiving services.
I'm just trying to understand if we're not having a problem with anything. Salons don't have a problem, there's been no ticketing for it, there's, barbershops have no problem, there's no ticketing for it. And we have public events where you get a license and people are out drinking in the park and there's no problem and nobody's getting ticketed for it. What are we really trying to do here?
well, again, and that's why we're here, why we're discussing this. And like I said, when this was brought up 7 or 8 years ago, it was decided not to address it because, first off, it's difficult to police. It's second, there was not an issue with the couple of restaurants that we had at the time that were BYOB. So it was just, the board decided just to shelve it at that time. Again, the reason we're bringing it up now is not so much the salon and small, like barbershops and things. It's mostly these larger venues that maybe haven't BYOB, and do we want to have a BYOB ordinance? And if everyone's okay with not doing it, that's fine, but again, we want to possibly address something down the road that may become an issue.
If I could, when you get a chance.
Okay.
I will say the staff has received inquiries about certain events that were, is this legal? Can they do this? Is this, but it hasn't been because people are spilling out of barbershops, stinking drunk and doing things. It's just like, people see ads or see things going on, and they say, hey, is that okay? So if the board here decides we don't need to pursue this, the staff hasn't answered. We've been directed that this is an activity that is not causing problems in the community. We're going to continue to proceed as, without requiring a salon license. And that's what I'm hearing tonight. The BYOB issue is, in restaurants, I don't know if anyone has, I guess you were talking about some there's some restaurants which will let you bring alcohol in. I don't know about that. I've seen it in different places. I'm aware of the practice. I went to a restaurant in Philadelphia where that was, we went just because of the name and it sounded fun, and everybody else had a bottle of wine, and we were fine without a bottle of wine. But the events where people are gathering in, particularly a couple of event halls. One's specifically asked for permission to be considered an event hall and matches the zoning. The other one was just an empty space. And we have people coming in and having a party, and there's alcohol there, and it sometimes is spilled out into the parking lot and that sort of thing, and having that additional tool to go and say, hey, you know, who has the Bassett training, who has the license to be distributing and alcohol among all the people here, who's making sure that no one's drinking underage. That's what's got us to bring these other things. One of the ways to go about that is in a event hall or a banquet hall to require someone to have a caterer's license, so there's a bartender, as it were, who's there to keep track of it. That was one suggestion. Or some type of BYOB, which we'd have to kind of create, because there weren't any other, and Suzanne did the survey with, combined with, I guess Nick actually sent it to DMMC to get information from other communities, but we don't see another example of that type of ordinance existing out there, where either the owner of the place or a person who will be using that space that night has to get a license, a BYOB license, and, you know, get Bassett training so we know that the alcohol is being used responsibly. So those are we're looking at now, from what I understand, is whether we want to do a caterer's license or some kind of BYOB license there. And then the other, the BYOB in restaurants or craft spaces, you know, I don't hear a lot of interest in that as well. So that's kind of where I'm interpreting the discussion is going.
Just goes there.
Well, like Elmhurst requires it. You can't have like an art gallery or something like that and do a wine tasting. So they regulate who's pouring and who's pouring what.
Yeah.
And then we also are taxing those with liquor license for having a liquor license and for pouring and a percentage of all their sales. So it seems a decisive disadvantage if we're allowing some people just to do it for free and other people not.
Yeah.
I mean, in the spirit of everybody's treated the same, everybody should be treated the same.
And as you can see in the DMMC memo that was sent out, you know, some towns have them, and, you know, we may want to go parallel some of these, or again do our own, but it's kind of, you know, trying to see what the board is interested in here.
I think you also put those with liquor license at a disadvantage of, you know, I have a liquor license, so I have to pay for that liquor license. I know that, you know, I'm mentioned frequently in your whatever they are, liquor commission meetings, and, you know, I'm under scrutiny for having that liquor license. And I pay 1.5% places for eating tax on top of that. You know, it doesn't seem equitable at all if other people can just, you know, skirt it and still have the same alcohol there, because maybe their restaurant's next to a liquor store or something, and you stop off and get it for wholesale prices and no regulation whatsoever without paying anything.
Yeah, I think there's a difference between, you know, a taco place or a whatever place that they're not going to be able to afford that, versus an open, large room that has no one watching. Just there's no one that understands how to cut someone off because they've been overserved. There's no stopping them from going out into the parking lot and drinking. There's, you know, and then they're hopping in cars. You know, there's underage kids because it's a cotillion, it's a quinceanera, it's a a fifth grader's birthday, whatever it is, and you get 150 people pouring into this place, and it's just coolers full of drinks, and there's everything. So I get what you're saying, but I think the one piece here is that commercial space. It's that commercial space. It's unregulated. There's nothing there. It doesn't even have to be tables in there. There's one long table just filled with whatever it would be. There's nothing to stop that.
Just Corky.
Well, I think the difference that the establishment is not selling the liquor is important, though. Because, I mean, yeah, there's the danger of underage drinking or drunk driving, but, you know, you could say that about private parties, too. We're going to require liquor licenses for those? I'm not sure I see the need for it.
Well, I think the difference is that, excuse me, the banquet facility is getting paid to use their facility. You know, if it's in your house, it's just friends coming over or a party.
Right. But they're
And
not
that
making,
gets it back to the commercial end of it.
Sure.
You know, you're not selling it, people are bringing it their own, but there is money being changed hands there as part of the
suppose.
transaction. Trustee Kumar?
Yeah, and the event possibilities, see, then you get to ticketing of the event, and it may be of that everything is rolled in, right? So, and you can't say it's specifically for liquor or not for liquor, and that all becomes an issue. So I think if you have an event hall and there is an event, a caterer's license should be required, pretty much. It's just too vague otherwise.
Okay. Trustee Alfano?
Is there a reason why we're looking at it, the catering license versus the banquet type license for an event space like that?
So when I was working on it, I guess I didn't fully, because we have Allegra in our, but we don't have an actual banquet license. And so initially, I wasn't considering that as adding. So I think that was just a gap that Julie and I, noticed today. I think we were trying to be flexible because by allowing a caterer to come in, you're, creating something that's relatively lower cost for the event space owner than having to be a full-blown liquor license holder. But I do think you see a lot of municipalities use it in general because it does provide an opportunity for restaurants to also have catering and have it licensed and regulated and, that sort of thing as well.
Yeah. Actually, I was looking at that, I wanted to see what Allegra's license was, and
Yes.
we don't have an
Banquet.
actual banquet, yeah.
And
Trustee
also,
Alfano?
one more thing, in the survey that came out from the DMCC, it's the Village of Willowbrook has a Class Q. They say that they don't have any Class Q issued right now, but I would be interested in taking a look at that as well, if and when we are looking at BYOB in the future.
Okay. Okay. So I don't know if we want to just take a consensus to see if, it seems like the board is not interested in regulating salons. We just get a consensus on that. No regulation on salons or barbershops or anything like that.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, Trustee Corkery?
This would be saying, just leaving it as it is with no regulations on
Yes or no to leave
salons.
things the way they are?
Correct.
I'll say
Yep.
yes.
Okay. Trustee Patrick?
I'm not in favor at this time of regulating salons.
Okay. That'd be a
That's
yes.
a yes.
That's a yes, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Yes or no? Trustee Kozar?
I don't even know if I can vote on a consensus.
Oh, that's right.
That's
I want
right.
somebody coming back to me and
Yeah, thank you.
giving me,
Recused. Trustee
whatever.
Kumar?
Yes.
Trustee Cordova?
Yes.
Trustee Alfano?
Yes.
President Casson?
Yes. Okay. And then we'll, just a consensus on moving this, I think, to the Liquor Commission to discuss this further and come up with, in accordance, actually in conjunction with the manager's office, on some type of BYOB ordinance for commercial spaces, and try to come up with that. A consensus on that, please.
Okay.
I have a question.
Yes.
What if you don't want a BYOB, you just want a commercial light? I mean, I'm thinking they should only have a catering license is what I'm feeling. So that's not BYOB at all.
Well, if you're having a catering license, that's just strictly food then. We're talking strictly alcohol now, correct?
So do you want, I guess, a BYOB license to allow for restaurants, as trustee Kozar mentioned, that are already doing it, to provide parameters for some facilities to have a carry-in BYOB? So not a special event. It sounds like nobody is interested in a special event type facility
Okay,
for
just for
BYOB.
the-
So do you want to allow for BYOB in our code with specific parameters
For restaurants.
for restaurants or small facilities that are, like, for instance, I think Batavia has one that is specific for axe throwing, right? So, you can have parameters that are around that.
Okay.
Okay.
I don't know that you could really consensus that, but we can put something together
Right.
and review it and have the liquor commission review it, if that's, you want to consider parameters for a BYOB.
Okay.
So looks concerned.
Trustee Patrick?
I also would like to see the ordinance that you propose forward and continue discussion on that before it comes to the board for a vote.
Yeah. Okay.
So for clarification, the General Assembly type of use will not be a BYOB. The village is not interested in entertaining a BYOB license for those General Assembly type uses. Okay. But with respect to a broader catering license or a license that would allow established restaurants to have a BYOB type of event, the village board seems to be open to reviewing that further. Absolutely.
Okay.
That makes more sense.
Any questions? Okay. Clerk Henneke, please.
Do you need a consensus, or
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, we'll do a consensus on that.
I think you need to do the two, the first, the one that's general, and that we vote on, and then the
Well,
one.
I think we'll just consensus on just the liquor commission and the manager's office coming up with some type of BYOB to
Let's
bring
just
it.
do two of them, let's just do it separately, then we can say no and yes to it, and that would be more clear to the liquor commission as well.
So what is General Assembly? Is that your music in the park example?
No, that would be an existing, establishment that just wants to open its doors to allow for various private parties. But it's not a catering, it's not a catering
rentals.
establishment.
The
It's
rentals.
just basically an open space renting for.
Yeah, we've
Right,
seen quite a few pop up. There's two in for CO right now. We issued one CO, and I'm already in conversation with two additional, where they have a space for rent that it's a blank canvas. You want it to be the three things that you listed, or a graduation party, or whatever. You can't host it at your house in your garage. You're going to go rent a space. We don't have a park district to do, those kind of facilities, so the private sector has figured out how to operate this, and you want to go rent it, go rent it. Right now, they're bringing their own liquor, which was the issue, which Zafana was talking about. So do we establish an actual liquor license for the holder to have, so he can serve liquor at that? All indoors, nothing outside.
The question is, if we do not establish it for that group, then they have to go through a process where they could still get a caterer and a catering license, right, for the event.
We don't actually have a catering license right now, but, they can get licensed through our available license as it stands.
Okay.
Yeah.
But not as BYOB.
No.
Correct. And that's the idea. I think that's why we're here,
Okay.
to do it for a BYOB for that type of space. Okay. Go ahead, yeah.
I'm sorry, so before we take any consensus vote, I didn't think that there was a consensus that we wanted that type of BYOB in that kind of a space, but maybe I'm misunderstanding our discussion.
Yeah, because I think
there is a
that's,
consensus, I'm just saying we'd vote no on it if we could
Okay.
vote.
yeah. Correct, so this would be for an event like that, a BYOB. Do you want us to have a license for the owner to get for parties like that?
Of those rental spaces.
Of those rental
That's specifically what
spaces.
we're renting. So it's not a general restaurant BYOB.
Correct, this would be just for a rental space, like a
Got it.
banquet hall.
Okay.
Correct. Okay. Okay, good.
Okay, that's what this one is for. Okay, trustee Cordova,
Yes.
trustee Kumar,
No.
okay, trustee Patrick,
No.
trustee Alfano. No. Trustee Kozar.
Same thing, even though it's a consensus.
Thank you. Let me see, trustee Corkery,
No.
President Kazone.
I say yes. Okay, so it looks like the board is not in favor of that type of BYOB, of licensing that type of BYOB. Okay.
Which is to say it's not allowed. Is that right?
No,
Which is to say it's allowed
Are
now.
we saying that we're not going to look at it at all now?
Correct.
So currently, it's not regulated. There's not a BYOB license. And that first question was entertaining whether or not the board would want to consider a BYOB license for that general assembly establishment. So that was, the consensus was no. There is no license that will be created, there is no BYOB license that will be created for that kind of an establishment.
Correct.
Which means it's allowed. So
No.
you can rent a place, you
No, no, no.
can bring your own alcohol.
No, so that's the next question, because it's not allowed unless it's specifically allowed, is our position. They would need a BYOB license to actually have that kind of event. So the next question is, does this board want to clarify its regulations to prohibit a BYOB license for that kind of establishment?
And everyone said no, except 2 people, correct?
No.
Did I do it backwards then?
Yes.
Okay,
So-
then I apologize.
So for
I have to switch mine,
clarification,
yeah.
okay, so for clarification on the
Yes.
consensus, trustee
I was like, why does
Cordova,
everyone say no?
it appears that you are not in support of an establishment, a general establishment like that, having a BYOB license. We shouldn't create one, right, for an establishment like that.
Okay,
General
let's,
Assembly.
maybe make the consensus this way. Are you in favor of a establishment doing parties without a license? Or would you rather see establishments that want to have BYO, have people bring their own liquor? Are you in favor of them doing it without a license?
Mr. President, may I throw a suggestion?
Sure.
That an assembly use require a banquet license.
Or like,
Because that's what Suzanne had represented earlier, that the banquet license was left off the memo because it was that cater conversation. But I think those assembly uses, the ones that we have 3 of, 2 potentially more, to actually acquire the banquet license.
Okay.
To close the loop on, is it allowed, is it not allowed,
Yeah.
because we're silent.
You know what I'm saying? I mean, the other part, so you get a banquet license, or you can require, full-on caterer license, and the caterer could have, but they would be
Have their
your
own.
bartender. So, I mean, maybe that, and how the individual banquet hall, assembly hall handles that would be up to them.
Right.
But we could add banquet and caterer, but not allow BYOB. In other words, there's no unregulated, everyone brings whatever you want into the facility. Somebody who's Bassett trained has to be distributing and probably selling the alcohol within the assembly hall venue.
Right, and with the banquet facility, you allow to have the one transaction between the person renting it and the banquet operator, instead of the individual sale like most restaurants are. So it is treated differently.
There would be no individual supplying of alcohol. The
Yeah.
banquet facility would be the supplier of the alcohol that would be served under the banquet license.
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
And then we can go get your liquor license if you want to operate this. Instead of,
Okay.
So do you want to get clarification?
yeah.
Because that's still open-ended, even though it's not permitted, it's not prohibited.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll see. Is the board in favor of prohibiting it? I think BYOB, because I think that's kind of...
At commercial/rental places.
Yes.
Yes, okay.
So are you in favor of prohibiting BYOB at commercial rental facilities?
Yes.
Okay, so that's kind of what we were looking at.
Okay.
So let's do that consensus
again.
then. This will be our last consensus.
Okay.
Okay.
Prohibiting at commercial and rental places.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Trustee Cordova.
Yes.
Okay. Trustee Corkery.
No.
Trustee Patrick.
Yes.
Trustee Alfano.
Yes.
Trustee Kozar.
Sitting this one out.
Recused. Trustee Kumar.
Yes.
President Kazone.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, so we are in favor of prohibiting it
And
in certain
Commercial
senses.
places.
was
Yeah,
there any
I apologize.
concerns with rescinding those 3 licenses
Oh,
that
yes.
were for beer? The 2 were for beer only, and the 1 was for the Odium. So we would bring that back to the board as well.
For getting rid of the 3
Those
licenses?
3 licenses.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. That was the first item on 3A, which the Liquor Commission had recommended getting rid of E, X, and Y, which we don't have any current licenses, and we don't have any facilities that would need those. So would the board be okay with getting rid of those? Okay, yeah, it's a voice vote. It looks like everybody would be.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay, do we have any public comments? Okay. And I thank former President Albothos for being here tonight. I appreciate it. Okay. Okay, can we have a motion for adjournment?
I'll make that motion.
Trustee Corkery?
I'll second.
Trustee Alfano, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, we will close at 7 o'clock, and we will reopen the regular meeting, give everybody 5 minutes. So we'll reopen at 7:05.